Hi guys, and welcome back to another books video. This video is going to be about the books that I read in the month of February, so if you want to hear my thoughts, go ahead and keep listening. The first book that I'm going to be talking about is called Man Tiger. I checked this out from the library. It's by an Indonesian author. His name is Eka Kurniawan, and this is a book that I read with my book club. The subject matter is about a young boy in Indonesia who becomes possessed by a tiger that has been passed down to him through his patriarchal lineage, so from his father's father. This is a very short read, but has a lot of different time jumps, all revolving around a central event, which is where Margio, the boy, commits a murder. So I don't think it's too much of a plot spoiler to let you know that the kind of main thing that happens is this young boy does murder someone, and he does that through the tiger that he has within. I think my book club and I were expecting this to be a little bit more magical realism, but for me, I really did enjoy the small parts of it that were kind of fanciful. I also really liked kind of the descriptions of Margio meeting the tiger for the first time and kind of falling in love with this internal being that's going to kind of be his guide, but also a really strong source of strength and almost like angry frustration that fuels him and ends up allowing him to murder someone. It was really cool how the book starts with kind of the first sentence describing the murder. So the first sentence of the book is, "On the evening Margio killed Anwar Sadat, Kiai Jaro was blissfully busy with his fish pond." And then the last sentence of the book is right before he's about to commit the murder. And then throughout, you're getting kind of all the different unfolding events and a little bit of kind of shifting perspectives. And so the structure and kind of the storytelling was done really well. It didn't really resonate with me that much emotionally though, and I do wonder if that's because I was reading a translation and not reading the original Bahasa, but I would give this a 3.8 out of 5. The next book I want to talk about is called Transcendent Kingdom by Gyasi. This is actually the second book that she's written. The first, which I haven't read but also got really rave reviews, is called Homegoing. And Gyasi's style, the book is kind of like a faux memoir, or I would say it's a novel that seems to draw very heavily from her own biography. But from what I understand, the first novel and this one as well kind of traces this family, which is similar to her own family, through its immigration process from Ghana to the United States, and kind of intergenerational trauma, and also the role of religion and the church in helping her family try to find meaning in life. The second book, Transcendent Kingdom, which is what I read, really focuses on the questions of how do we as humans deal with grief and just really severe, unrelenting pain. There is an event that happens to the main character, which I won't spoil, that really kind of rips apart her mother's world, and then that then has trickle-down effects to her. Basically, her mother is overcome with grief and really spirals into deep mental illness. And then another pervading layer on top of that is the fact that they're African immigrants, also for her generation, essentially just Black Americans growing up in the southern United States and facing all sorts of racism and just kind of really difficult experiences, I think, when it comes to acceptance and what it means to have a new community, especially that divide between generations. I think it's a very familiar immigrant story in the sense that the generation above is really trying to pursue a new future and has some ambition there. And then throughout that journey also has a lot of pain and obstacles. And then the generation below having grown up in the United States, has a very American identity, but is also very othered and doesn't always feel like they can fit in. I thought a really interesting angle to this kind of story that she's telling is the role of religion. Her mother is deeply religious and was religious in Ghana as well. And then when they moved to Alabama, she joins kind of an evangelical Christian church. And just that trust in the church, even though Gyasi very cleverly kind of like tears that down a little bit, the contradictions and kind of the hypocrisy that religion has played. I felt that really resonated with me, because even though I'm not religious now, I did grow up somewhat religious. And she describes a few different situations where now, as a scientist studying for a PhD, she kind of feels protective of the ways in which religion has buttressed her family, but also failed her family. And I think just like that very nuanced portrayal of the fact that humans are so lost at sea that we kind of need something to hold on to, and how it's not really fair or multifaceted to just dismiss religion in the way that sometimes coastal elites might do. And that's because she's doing her PhD at Stanford, and she talks a lot about kind of the research that she's doing, and you can see how what she's chosen to study is really driven by these traumas in her childhood and also in her family. This is just a very raw and well-written novel. It's not overwrought. The language isn't overly emotional. I think all of the sentences and the language is well crafted to really deliver an impact. And I found it very moving. My only low light, I would say, is the pacing of the plot. I thought the book was great up until the ending, really. I thought the ending was kind of a letdown, and the pacing was a little bit off towards the end. I thought like the slow build and delving into her childhood was really impactful, and especially present day, her struggle to try and reconnect with her mother and to make sense of all of these formative events in her life were really compelling. But then the ending was a little bit too neat and pat, and maybe skipped forward to an epilogue that it didn't need to. So I was kind of disappointed by the ending, and I think endings are really important when it comes to novels. Like, you should have something in mind that you're driving towards, I believe, as an author, when you're crafting your ending. So for that, I'll probably give this a 4 out of 5. A really important kind of emotional journey that we're going through with her, and very beautiful writing, but just a couple issues I think around like the overall pacing of the plot, especially towards the end. The next book I want to talk about is the book that I read about Singapore this month. I was such a fan of this. This is definitely going to go into my top 5 books that everyone should read if they want to learn more about Singapore. It's called Liberalism Disavowed: Communitarianism and State Capitalism in Singapore. It's by Chua, Beng, Huat. And shout out to my friend Tim, who lent me this book after he started watching my videos and recommended it to me. He actually got a signed copy, which is very cool. I first heard of Chua, Beng, Huat from the Naysayers book club. He penned one of the chapters in that compilation, and he talked about why the PAP, which is the governing party in Singapore, has rejected the idea of liberalism. And so that's really the thesis of this book, Liberalism Disavowed. And I think that this is a must read for anyone who wants to understand Singapore beyond the superficial layer of chewing gum, Disneyland with the death penalty, and they have an authoritarian government. That's such a lazy way to view Singapore. And honestly, at this point, one of my biggest pet peeves, like, if we're going to be friends, I need to like give you an education of how Singapore is so much more than that, or that's just one facet of how you can perceive Singapore. So the main crux of this book, which I just love and think everyone should learn more about, is that even though foreign observers, expats in Singapore, whoever, love repeating this trite phrase, authoritarian rule, it's an authoritarian government, That's actually not the case. And this book really lays out a very historical and accurate depiction, I feel, of the true political origins of the PAP, which is actually quite social democratic. Not even quite, I mean, it is a social democratic party. Delving into a little bit of history, Lee Kuan Yew did team up with the left-wing labor factions in Singapore, and also like the labor unionists, in order to form kind of a united front against the British colonial powers. But he then turned on them, and they were jailed and kind of sidelined and didn't stand for elections as the PAP decided to continue to consolidate power. But what this book is all about are kind of the political economic origins of the PAP's policies, and how those policies have played such an impact to today and really are like the framing viewpoint for how the PAP views governing Singapore. So the four kind of big social democratic practices that he covers are: one, of course, the ideology of being anti-liberal; two, Singapore's national public housing program; three, state capitalism, and kind of how that's different from Chinese SOEs. And he gives a very interesting overview of the Sovereign Wealth Fund, the government-linked corporations in Singapore, and how the proceeds from that state capitalism are directly channeled into, part of it is channeled into social programs and these kind of welfare initiatives that help buttress the PAP's legitimacy and helps them to continue to be reelected. And number four is multiracialism. And in each of these areas, I feel that there is a very lay understanding, or a very superficial understanding of, what is public housing in Singapore, or what is racial harmony in Singapore. And I'm not saying that this is the end-all be-all, but I do feel that this is a very good starting point to try and have a more nuanced view of each of those areas. There are certainly like some shortcomings, and he is one voice, right? And so when you're doing history, you have to like look at multiple accounts and see multiple perspectives. But what I love about this book is for each of these topics, he provides a detailed historical account of the evolution in Singapore, and then also provides some global contextualization. So learning more about how liberalism spread in the West and in Europe really helps to inform my understanding of why the PAP calls itself as anti-liberal. Same with like learning about public housing programs in general, or comparing the Western viewpoint of multiculturalism to how the PAP has gone about having a multiracial society. He does provide kind of either the Western reference point or a more global outlook, which I think really helps to contextualize my understanding of these things within the Singapore context. Same with state capitalism. He does mention like Chinese SOEs, state-owned enterprises, and kind of how a lot of the corruption in Chinese SOEs, but also the state-owned enterprises in Indonesia and other Southeast Asian countries, have really created this perception that state capitalism can't work, and how Singaporean state capitalism is different. I do feel that he is critical, and he isn't overly praiseworthy. I mean, I think he does see the shortcomings in mostly what he focuses on as one quote-unquote failure would be kind of the approach to multiracialism, and the fact that the Singapore government has taken such a kind of external view of it, in the sense that everyone has a racial categorization under CMIO, so Chinese, Malay, Indian, and other, and the fact that there's Racial Harmony Day, and all of the public holidays reflect different holidays from different religious and ethnic backgrounds. That is kind of a very external, top-down control perspective of viewing managing race, which he does trace to colonial origins. Like, that's how the British were approaching race. But I think in general, he's not out to either tear down or build up beyond his main argument, which is it's quite lazy and quite misleading to just brush off the PAP as authoritarian. You have to really delve into where their policies and practices originate. And it does change. It has shifted, obviously, from the 50s to the 70s to today. And he mentions that as well. But I feel like if you just need a one-stop primer to kind of contextualize and serve as the foundation of your understanding of Singapore and whether it's authoritarian and whether it's anti-welfare or does it actually have a very strong social democratic bent. And even these labels don't really matter. What matters is the fact that the PAP started out with these very strong social democratic origins led to the provision of these certain services like public housing, like the proceeds of state capitalism, which for the most part does go back into Singapore in terms of dividends for citizens. These types of things really help you understand the policy making. And I feel like having that historical overview is really important if we want to be critical about today's policies. Like, I think it's important to understand where things come from because that explains why the PAP thinks that way. And only then can we then react to it or criticize it or understand whether it's able to change. So as you can tell, I really like this book. I will give it a 4.9 out of 5. I'm really excited to level up now that I've read a good year's worth of books about Singapore and something that's pretty academic about the political governance. I'm really excited I feel like I'm getting to the point where I can feel legitimate in having my own thoughts or my own criticisms because I've put in enough work to do the studying. So that's really exciting. The last book I read in February is called Notorious RBG, The Life and Times of Ruth Bader Ginsberg. I read this as part of my company's book club that was celebrating Women's History Month, which is in March, and International Women's Day, which is March 8th. And this was an easy kind of short read with a lot of references to kind of the pop culture phenomenon that really emerged around RBG in the last few years. And I don't think I ever would have really considered myself as a big fan of RBG, but that's just because I didn't know that much about her. And so now that I've read this book, I'm definitely a fan. And I'm really appreciative of the opportunity to kind of refresh my women's rights history in the US context. I did also learn a few things that I didn't know at all when it came to RBG that I found really inspiring, namely the fact that she had such a strong friendship with Justice Scalia, who is her ideological opposite, and also her love of opera. Like, as a former orchestra musician and a former violinist, I just love how into classical music all of the Supreme Court justices are, and the fact that they go to opera together was amazing. And then I think also just learning that she really preferred incremental progress rather than sweeping decisions, and she really wanted to do things the right way. That resonated with me personally because I feel like a lot of times I struggle with having views that I don't feel are progressive enough, and I feel like I'm falling behind in challenging myself, and that part of me battles with the part of me that really wants to do things the right way and to have sustainable change and not to get drawn up in just what's the loudest and making the most noise. And so that, I think, was reflected in a lot of RBG's life and kind of her opinions around how to go about changing the really messed up laws and restrictions that were on women back then and still are today. I was a little worried that the book might be too pop. I mean, there's definitely not really, it's not there's no research necessarily, and there's no independent reporting. It's definitely a book that kind of compiles together a lot of existing interviews, but I think that's fine. That's all it was meant to be, and I feel like it does do a good job of packaging everything together and having a strong through line of RBG's personal life and her career. I think that her relationship with her husband was really well known, the fact that he was such an equal partner to her, but I just kind of was left off the bandwagon and didn't really know about that. And so reading about it in the book was very inspiring to me, because I don't think we can have equality in the workplace unless we have equality at home. And Marty just seems like such a lovely person, and the fact that they had such a meaningful relationship where they really struggled a lot and overcame a lot of challenges was inspiring to hear about. I'm not sure if it piqued my interest enough for me to read something that's a little bit more rigorous, but I did consider trying to find something that delved into the court cases a lot more deeply. This book is definitely kind of general audience, very accessible. So while it talks about the landmark court cases that RBG worked on, it definitely does cover that. It doesn't really go into like the legal arguments too much or into the historical or political context. It definitely does enough for what this book is, but I was thinking maybe I would try to find something that was a little bit more detail oriented when it came to that, because I think it would be good to have as kind of my foundation of understanding for women's rights in the US, which I actually don't know that much about, I think, and it might be good to read up on. But I have such a long book list that that'll probably go towards the bottom priority of my book list for now. But I do think it would be good to get a better understanding of kind of the arc of legal progress. And obviously I don't want to become an expert or anything, but just to have one layer deeper in terms of her career and kind of the importance of her decisions. I will give this book a 3.5 out of 5. I think it's a nice kind of reminder of the importance of all of the progress that we've made so far, but obviously a lot more to go. And I'm really looking forward to discussing it in my company book group and seeing the different reactions. Obviously, I'm based out here in Singapore with the APAC offices, and this is a very US-centric book, so I'm hoping that we can find a way to bridge a very US-centric topic and person to folks' experiences out here in Asia. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed what you heard, please feel free to subscribe, give this video a like. I'm reading one book about Singapore per month. I'll continue to do that for this year. Other than that, I love reading a lot of novels, science fiction, fiction written by women. I've been reading a lot of memoirs as well, and also trying to beef up my nonfiction. So figuring out, are there some other categories that I might get into? But so far, most of my nonfiction has been about Singapore. Anyway, thank you for coming along for the ride. If you read any of these books, that's kind of the whole reason I do these videos, is try to have a conversation in real life about any of these books. If you've read them, let me know, leave a comment or reach out to me, and I'd love to hear what you thought about them.